Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Tree Planners podcast. And we're joined, as always, by Margaret.
Hello.
And yeah, you like that?
Yeah, thank you. It's an inside joke for those of you that follow along.
And today we're joined by Jeff Monague as well, an old friend, and we're really pleased to have him for Indigenous Reconciliation, Truth and Reconciliation Day. We're recording this a little bit earlier, and so we'll be releasing this on September 30th, and hopefully nothing really crazy happens between now and then. But welcome, Jeff. It's nice to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
No worries. Would you like
And
to introduce yourself, Jeff, as far as how you see your spot in this world and a little bit of your history?
Yeah. Mai bojo kinawea, gizidotem, mai gimen akawenin, kachimnising jinkade kiblis miode bin dogsian. I am my gunman in Akwe. That's my Ojibwe name. And I'm of the Eagle Clan. I'm from the Beausoleil First Nation on Christian Island. And I'm glad to be here today.
Thanks.
I'm also Jeff Monague. That's my Indian name.
Yes, absolutely. And you also work with Springwater Park as well, for those who are local, or are you not doing that anymore?
No, I do that. I'm still the manager at Springwater Provincial Park, and we have a partnership with the province of Ontario, and we've had that since 2015. So we're co-managing the park, and so we keep busy.
Adam, did you want to start with some of the things that you'd like to talk about?
well, just real quick off the top, because I tend to forget to do this. If you find this interesting, if you find this podcast useful, just help spread the word a little bit. Leaving a rating on your podcast platform helps a lot in that regard. And otherwise, like, subscribe, share, and do all of that stuff. I guess this connects a little bit to one of the things that we were talking about in the green room, which is the voice of or the presence, I guess, of progressive voices, of voices that try to support others, in the most sort of broad sense, that enable and lift up and have a positive vision for the future. Is it seems like it's a bit of an arms race out there nowadays with all of the platforms. A lot of right-wing voices have a lot of money behind them, and they are able to I guess pay for clicks, pay for all of the resources and platforms and the infrastructure behind pushing their voices into the digital world and then on into the real world, so to speak. And so that, just to reinforce the necessity and the value of, if you sort of appreciate the take that we have on things here, of liking and sharing this podcast and other podcasts and other platforms and voices that also sort of try and lift others up, spread that positive vision for the future. And so this is one of the things that we were just sort of touching briefly upon before we hit record here, was how it seems to me like we, about 10 years ago, and this is actually, this is the 10-year anniversary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's publication of their actions, right?
Mhm.
I think so. About 10 years, and it seems like we were on a bit of an upward trajectory towards kind of figuring out who we want to be as a country and as human beings that sort of come together and try and do something together. Uh, and a big part of that is grappling with a past that has had a lot of problems, and you can't really move beyond problems until you acknowledge them and you address them and redress them and learn from them. And that's how we grow as people and living beings. But it seems like recently that upward trajectory has been bending downwards. The snow on the bough of the evergreen kind of bending it over, and the pressure that is really sort of making it tip towards the ground. So it's dispiriting and disheartening to see that happen. I think a big, for me anyways, and just my sort of general exposure to um, to culture, I guess, that we have in Canada, it seems like the truth and reconciliation, that the movement on that has been slowing. And in large part, it seems that the movement on in areas that don't that are spreading disinformation and misinformation with regards to it, that are sort of spreading fear and hate and ignorance about it, that seems to be on the uptick. Um, yeah, I don't know if I have a question there. This is something that we
I
were
think it's a
talking
comment
about.
that probably Jeff would like to weigh in on.
Yeah, well, and it was actually a comment that Jeff made before, so it's not coming from me. It's coming from Jeff,
Yeah.
really, initially.
Well, I guess the best place to start is the Truth and Reconciliations recommendations, 94 recommendations that they made. And there is a section in the recommendations. So section 60 actually talks about education. And there's a number of recommendations that were made under that section 60 to deal with education and in terms of education for the public as well as our own educational institutions. But the problem is that people are, I think a lot of times people are not comfortable enough with the topic because they don't know enough about it to be able to live out those recommendations that are there. And I'm talking about non-Native people, because we as Native people are we lived all of that. We lived that topic, so we understand it to the fullest. And so what happens is that the educational institutions, the school boards, universities, colleges will call us in, and they'll ask us to speak to their body. But there's only a few of us that can do that. So we're spread out over the next few days. We're going to be doing this at a lot of different places, trying to educate the public, but we're a very small number. And in response to that, we have another group that's moving in Canada that has moved to displace our truths of what happened during the residential school era. So there's a movement of denialism that's become very strong, and um, they have podcasts, they have social media, they have all kinds of money behind them. They're even on radio and television, and a lot of um, the major companies in Canada are actually bringing them and putting them on their newscasts. I don't know if it's deliberate or whether um, they are unknowingly bringing that message to the general public. But it's really dangerous because there is a movement to say that all of this uh, that my mother went through never actually happened. But we are fully aware that it's happened because it's still happening. People cannot say that it's not happening anymore because ripples of all of that are still happening even in my community. So um, we're still suffering from what happened to our grandmothers and our mothers and fathers within the community, because we've never really had anything. We've had no money behind us to help us to heal from all of that. And the TRC has laid out a plan for us to be able to do that. But the Canadian government also has not started. Well, they've started, but that's where they left. So we have 94 recommendations, and to date, they probably only have implemented 6 or 7 of those recommendations. And they always come out with what it's going to cost. They put a price tag on it every time, so it stops them from actually doing this work. Whereas we in the grassroots are doing that work. We're going out into the schools. We're going out and we're trying to educate people, but we're a very small number of people, and so I hate to say that it feels like we're fighting a losing battle, but some days I feel like that. I feel like we're running uphill and we're not getting much support out there. So it's nice to have podcasts like yourselves that can help us to spread the word, to get the information out there.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that, it's funny how the government always talks about money when it's always something that they don't want to do. When it's things that they do want to do, it's money's never an issue.
Yeah.
You can spend billions on pipelines or whatever initiative, and there's never a question of like, how are we going to pay for that? And then for other things, it becomes like, oh well, how will we pay for that? Right? It's it seems to be a common excuse, and I think that's
a good example of that right now is. Not to change topics, but it's all related, really.
Yeah.
It's colonialism. Doug Ford is going into the Ring of Fire, and he's building a road into the northern communities, and he's framing it as we're doing these guys a favor by building a road into their communities, but they're only doing it to get at the resources. They never built a road in how old is Canada?
Right. Right. Well, and I think the government in general, governments, it's not just one government, but I think governments in general try to play on I don't know if it's willful ignorance or just ignorance, but of the non-native community where we don't maybe appreciate the politics. And so they'll say, well, there's one council that really wants it. And the rest, you know what I mean? Like they try to play the councils off one another. And then you have representatives that are supposedly Indigenous, but not quite. And it's, they use all of these types of things to make it seem like the people that are opposing are just rebel rousers, and they're not actually looking out for the best of their community, while the other ones that they cherry pick or the ones that they've decided are easy to work, whatever it happens to be, these are the ones that are supportive. So it really does do a lot of damage to figure out what the issue is, what the truth is, and also how are people outside of the Native community supposed to engage, because it feels like it's represented as this is infighting, right? Don't go there. What do you think think I'm characterizing that properly?
No, I think so. I think you are, because the general public in Canada, and I get this all the time when I speak to different groups all around the county and throughout Ontario, non-natives will always say, but why do natives not agree that as a whole across the board? Why can't they agree? Well, my question right back is, why can't Canadians agree on every issue across the board?
Exactly.
Why would we be expected to be different from you? We have different views in our community, just like yours.
Yeah. And I do think that's where you hear people say, well, the politics is, the non-native politics is simple. Native politics is not simple. I was like, do you realize how complicated the politics are in the non-native, like it is pretty toxic. Everyone, are you left, are you right? I don't know, it depends, like, I mean, the people that you think are left and are not, and
Yeah.
it is complicated. So I've always wondered why, whether it was romanticizing the idea of what Indigenous people were supposed to represent, or whether it was like a tactic to kind of make it feel, seed the confusion. But I was always curious about why that became such a thing, that you guys are all supposed to be getting along. I don't understand what the problem is. If you can't all agree, then why are we helping you, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think that's, maybe it's more of an excuse, I'm not sure.
Well, it's a product of colonialism.
Right.
When our original teachings told us that we are to be caretakers of the land, we are to be the guardians of the land in every which way that we could be, and that we are part of everything, that we're not separate from anything, and we can't separate ourselves from a tree, a piece of grass, or even a mosquito that's flying. We're all connected. We're the same thing. So if we're destroying those, we're really destroying ourselves, and those are part of our teaching. So that uh, I think early on the British government knew and studied that, and so they knew that if they could get rid of that way of thinking, then it would be that much easier for them. So that's why things like residential schools were implemented to take those teachings out of us, so that we would forget that. So generations of people through colonialism have grown up without those teachings. So we actually have now we actually have right wingers in our community, which was impossible to have even 30 years ago. So when I see it now, I just go, wow, it's unbelievable. So colonialism is working in that way, but there's still a good part of us who understand and have gone back to the teachings, and we are there to better connect ourselves with everything as Indigenous people. So our original teachings helped us to do that, so that we understand that we're a part of everything. We're not separate from anything. So we're not as ready to go and pave over everything,
Mm,
bulldoze everything,
right.
because we think about what we're doing to us, our brothers and sisters, the animals, the trees, the plants, everything.
Adam, are you listening? It feels like you have a comment or question.
Well, that sense of interconnection, I think. Well, one of the things that you mentioned about, I forget exactly how you said it, but it had to do with the idea of being comfortable addressing these issues, or the lack of that comfort, that people are uncomfortable addressing difficult issues that might have bearing on who they are, that might require something of them. Um, and as you're talking about this, the sense of being connected to everything, I was thinking also that what that means is you are taking into account the interests of beings and entities, uh, in addition to your own interests, which means also that then you have to balance what you want and what you take from around you, from the environment, with what those other things in the environment need. And I just thought that that was an interesting, so then that there is a sense of responsibility inherent in that, to the world around you, and assuming the burden of that willingly, so that you're not looking at the world around you as if it exists only for your own sake, for your own interest. And to me, it kind of seems like that is a dominant through line in popular culture right now, which is this very narcissistic, self-interested approach to the world, where really you only want to engage with things that give you sort of satisfaction or pleasure. And there's so many tools now that we have to distance ourselves from things that don't, uh, that might sort of require something of us in certain ways. And we sort of surround ourselves, we put ourselves in these little bubbles and things like that. And I think that, then you can easily go from that to the echo chamber bubbles that we all have on social media and things like that. We only really engage with things that trigger that dopamine release in our brain, the confirmation bias stuff. So I found that an interesting thing. Do you think that kind of is a bit of a part, perhaps part of what's made it difficult for our society on a broader scale to actually engage meaningfully with reconciliation?
Yeah, and I think it happened a long time ago. So there was a split where the larger society split away from the land itself, because we are the spirit of the land. The spirit of the land is us, and the land is us as well in spirit. And we've disconnected ourselves from that. So, so that's how within since 1867 we have polluted waters, we have destroyed habitats for a lot of animals in Canada. The Great Lakes are pretty much polluted, and we rather than allow things to be what they always were, uh, we put a price tag on everything to try to um, remediate the damage that was done. An example of that is when I, as the manager of Springwater Provincial Park, got to Provincial Park and got to that park in 2015. I walked the land. And I got to understand what the land was needing and what the land wanted. And I let the land tell me what it wanted. And it wanted very much to be allowed to be what it was supposed to be, because they were manicuring everything, they were cutting everything. Even the trails were being cut so that people wouldn't touch leaves. People, simple things like that. You're actually walking through the forest, but you're not actually walking through the forest. There were things that weren't there, like some of the little animals in the waters, even snakes. There weren't any snakes on that land when I got there. There were some of the insects that fly around that weren't there, some butterflies that weren't there, that were in other habitats. So what we did was we just left it alone. We didn't cut it. We didn't manicure it. We just left it alone and allowed it to regenerate and grow back to where it was. So if you go there now, you will find that there's a lot of new vegetation. There are a lot of trees that have sprouted out of the ground. The insects are back. The butterflies are back. The snakes are back. There's now 4 different species of snake that are in that land that weren't there before. And that's just simply just letting the land be what it wants to be. Just let it be itself. Mm-hmm. And we benefit from that. We benefit from that because of our connection. We breathe, they breathe. So what would have happened in the past was the province would have put a price tag on that remediation. And they would have said, oh, it's going to cost us this much to have everything restored back to where it was. And then they would have saw that price tag and thought, oh, no, maybe not. Maybe it's not worth it. But we haven't done that. We just let it go. We just allowed for everything to go back to where it was.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important, considering, talking about truths, to just mention that the province was going to shut down that park. The province
Yeah.
was going to sell that park. And the word was that it potentially was going to be open for aggregate extraction, was what I remember. Maybe you
Yeah.
remember it differently, Jeff. But it was because of Indigenous resistance and Indigenous activism and care for the land, which is why Springwater Park still stands today and why it has become a hub for educational and community events and wonderful place. So,
Yeah.
people, I don't want people to think it was this benevolent government who was like, we should really just do something great and co-manage with Indigenous nation. That's not how it came to be. So in the spirit of truth, I just thought that would be important to mention.
That
Uh,
was totally at our suggestion. It wasn't their suggestion. They never
yeah,
came to us and said, hey, we should be partners in this thing. What we did was we reminded them that we have agreements with them that says that we should be partners in this.
yeah,
So they reluctantly came forward and began to work with us.
yeah. The one other thing I was going to pick up on the thread, Jeff, that you were talking about humans having a connection to land and colonialism. I completely agree with you that colonialism has stripped for many human beings, non-natives included, um, the connection to land. That idea that land is important. And one of the Indigenous which I like, Robin Walt Kimmerer in Braiding Sweetgrass, starts off her book talking about when she teaches her university classes, and she asks people to say, what role do humans have in the land? And the students all put things like, we destroy it, we cut it down, we dig it out, and the thing that struck me about that beginning part of the book was that she said colonialism has, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the essence of it was, colonialism has stripped away the idea that humans have a beneficial role in land, in water. It has all become, we are not nature. Nature is there to exploit. We're only there to cause it harm. And her book continues on to talk about the beneficial role that humans have played in Indigenous cultures in the
Yeah.
land, from harvesting to allowing certain areas to grow, that sort of thing. And I thought, wow, what a, if we stopped othering, like othering is one of those strategies that we use to say we don't have to deserve, those people don't deserve our respect, those people don't deserve our care, those people don't deserve humanness. But I think in a similar way, we've othered kind of the land and the natural world. It's not a part of us. It's something that's just there to be exploited, just like everybody else that we lump into, they're not like us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, that wasn't really a question, but just a thread of I'd like to mention that part in that book. And that's what brought it up for me, is the idea that, we have been stripped of it. And I think it's hard from a non-native position, for those that haven't really started to decolonize themselves. It's really hard to understand an Indigenous perspective when it requires an understanding of connection. It requires an understanding of care and stewardship, and that you are connected to the land, you are connected to the water, you are a product of it. And so people are like, oh, that's just too far for me, because we're just the people that are supposed to raise and pave it, and like we're not actually supposed to be a part of it.
Yeah. And really what you're talking about. So to connect this to TRC and to connect this to September 30th, what you're talking about is exactly what we began with. And that's section 60 in the 94 recommendations. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that deals with education. So what you're doing is you're educating the public right now.
Right.
But what you should be doing is referencing the TRC when you're doing that, and say, based on the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we're talking about section 60 when we're talking about this, and this is how we fit into that, because you're actually fitting into all of that right now,
Right.
as you're talking about these things. I don't have to say it; you're saying it beautifully.
But I should be referencing more of why these things, how they fit into the larger picture of reconciliation, because Adam
Yeah.
had mentioned a little bit earlier, and he might want to pick up on this thread. is that sometimes non-native communities go, I don't even know what reconciliation means. I don't know if I'm doing it. There almost seems like, how am I doing it right?
Yeah.
Give me a thing of like, okay, you want a land acknowledgement, now I know I'm doing reconciliation. And I'm sure there's a whole piece of that, but there is this, okay, I get it, so I'll factor that in. But then non-native communities are like, oh, I don't know what do you even do for reconciliation? What does it mean? I just have to apologize all the time? Like, it really is maybe more simply understanding those recommendations and understanding how you fit into them.
Yeah, it's understanding who you are as an individual. Uh, maybe you're not even reconciling anything in your own life, and so it would be hard for you to get to this place of what we're asking in terms of reconciliation. Maybe you're not reconciling your own understanding of what is being done to the environment, what is being done to our children for the future. And you have to understand those things in order to get to this place where we are in terms of understanding.
Yeah. Adam?
Well, I'm just looking at I just looked up the National Commission on Truth and Reconciliation website, and if you're out there, anybody can do this. And then there's also a pocketbook that you can order, right, with the recommendations, with the calls to action.
Yeah. Yeah. So it worries me that people are not aware enough about that. It's been 10 years since the recommendations were released, and we had a big splash at the beginning. People were willing to do it. The prime minister at the time talked about all the great things that were going to happen, but didn't actually begin implementing anything except for the window dressing and using reconciliation as a buzzword. So that's done all the time now. So even Doug Ford will do it when he's talking about going into the ring of fire to extract resources. He says it's reconciliation in action. When I would say, hey, what recommendation are you working from?
Right.
Show me which one you're working from, because reconciliation is just being used for that. It's being used when the government gives some funds for somebody to build a new health center in one of the First Nation communities. Then the minister will go into that community and say, this is reconciliation in action, but not actually quoting or connecting to the TRC and saying this is recommendation number 23 or whatever.
To show that they have come at it in a good way with proper intention.
So if the media was going to be a partner in all of this, they would be the one saying, excuse me, Minister, which recommendation are you speaking of? Which recommendation from the TRC are you referencing when you talk about reconciliation?
I would imagine that would catch most of them flat-footed.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, though, they would have to learn it and internalize it, and that really goes towards the to make concrete changes in society, which is sort of the preamble to it. That it really becomes central to the decision making.
And that's also why it's being taken apart right now. That's also why you have another movement that's of denialism that's taking a hold in Canada, and so it's winning because people don't understand the TRC recommendations. They don't understand how they can fit into all of that. If they understood that, then they would be ready, and they would already have started movements within their own communities based on the recommendations. Because I think it needs to be a grassroots. I don't think we can wait for the government. At the current pace that the government is working to implement recommendations, it would take us another 350 years to have all those recommendations realized. They're not doing it. So I wouldn't even hold my breath for 350 years.
And I think it would also, people took the time, and maybe that's something that if our listeners are interested in doing something on September 30th, I would, or any day, but particularly on September 30th, if you're looking for an action, I would suggest that maybe looking up that website and going through and I mean, maybe you have a better one, but I would be thinking if you don't know where to start, maybe that's a really good place to start is to look at the document, look at some of the recommendations, see how there's ones that you can implement or fit in within your network or your structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think I have friends in Simcoe County who were allies who, when I was speaking to them 10 years ago, didn't have a lot of understanding. But now they themselves have educated themselves to the point where they could sit here in my place and tell you much of what I'm talking about. And I would feel comfortable with them doing that because they're reconciliation in action.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they've actually started their own individual movements based on any one of the 94 recommendations that are there. So there are people out there.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you say to someone then who might be listening to this, who thinks about this in the sense of, well, why should I have to uh, assume this additional responsibility in my life for others? And I'm kind of hoping that I'm presenting that in a way that also gets at that this isn't just about addressing the needs or issues with that are others, but it's also sort of doing this work um, is doing work in yourself as well.
Yeah. It's I guess the best way to say is that we could be partners in Canada. That's what was supposed to happen at the beginning. That's what those treaties were at the beginning. They were supposed to be partnerships. That's what a treaty is. And we've never realized that in Canada because we've left that idea out of it. All it meant to the British government was that we would take land. That the treaties were about taking land. The treaties weren't about sharing land. So when you have the Ontario government going into the Ring of Fire, they would be talking about it as equal partners, not as, well, we're going to give the Native people some of this. So don't worry about that. They're going to be looked after. That's always been said. And look what happened. So that frame of thinking is still going forward. We need to be partners. We need to be a part of this. And we need when we are partners, then we're part of the economy. We can't be a part of the economy because we don't have economies. We have never been allowed to have economies. Right from the beginning, when we tried to do these things and become part of all of this, then we had people who petitioned their their elected official to say, no, we don't want the Native people involved in this. We don't want them to be in our markets. So please keep them out. So that's what was done. We had some of the most successful farming operations in all of Simcoe County, but because we weren't allowed to sell anything, we weren't allowed to sell anything that we grew. Uh, we it wasn't viable for us, and that's the way it was then. And so you can go to my community today, and nobody's farming. Nobody. So that's just one example of what happens when you don't allow for that kind of sharing that the original agreements called for. All those treaties called for that.
There's also, I mean, a little bit top of mind for a lot of people nowadays, perhaps, is I guess the early sort of formation of Canada and things like the War of 1812, which I don't think, Canada would not exist in its current state if it were not for, I think, sort of the bulk of the force really coming from a lot of Indigenous people, right? And those agreements, which were meant to be followed through upon, then and really were not subsequent to that in return for their help. And then I guess asking the question of what kind of a country and what kind of people do we want to be? Do we want to be the people that don't honor agreements? Like, there's pretty prime examples of that currently, like to the south of us, where they have a president who has made an entire lifetime of not honoring agreements. Or do we want to be a country that actually upholds its agreements and sort of strives for those aspirations?
Yeah. You mentioned 1812. Within 3 years of the War of 1812, we signed a treaty in 1815 for much of Simcoe County. So the Simcoe Treaty, which means Barrie, all the way up south of Aurelia to just south of Midland, across to Wasaga Beach and down. So a huge chunk of land. And that treaty, I'm very aware of what it said we were supposed to share in the land. And in return, the British promised us certain things that they never delivered on, one of them being money. And there were supposed to be annuity payments made forever and ever. And those were never, they went for a while, and then they stopped them. And they started calling them even gifts rather than annuity payments. So when they started calling them gifts, then it made it seem to the non-native public that, they're just giving to them. So it was easy to eventually take away those gifts to people who were undeserving of it. So those annuity payments stopped because the general public said, we don't need to be giving them gifts. So it's agreements like that. And you don't know that. You don't know that because you were never educated in that. You don't know what Treaty 18 said. You don't know what Treaty 16 said. You don't know what Treaty 5 said. And these are the pre-Confederation treaties that are still living, breathing documents. You have some general idea of the 1923 Williams Treaty, but you don't have all of the facts of it. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So your education systems didn't teach that. So that's why we are where we are, because you don't have an understanding of your true history on the land. If you had a full understanding all the way through, then we would be at a different place. We wouldn't be talking about why we're trying to get into the Ring of Fire. We might actually be working together already doing that because it's benefiting everybody.
It's, I was reading this book, I don't know, a few months ago about crucial conversations. And it said one of the important things is to have a shared understanding, right? And I think that's what the TRC tried to elicit, was this shared understanding. And so it's kind of interesting, and I agree with what you said about our education system and what we know and what we don't know. And I think I would go as far as saying, like, it's intentionally we're not supposed to know certain things. It oopsie, we didn't really cover that. It was more of like, we don't need to share that with them. And I think it's quite interesting when I come across some of people in the non-native community when we're talking about things like monuments and historical landmarks, and they're like, but that's our history. I'm like, you don't actually know all of the history. You know a section of history. And maybe once you understand the entire, history is never just one point of view. There's going to be, many points of view. But if you only know one and that's the basis of what you make a decision on, what about the other points of view? And maybe if there was a shared understanding about history, then you would say, oh, well, that's representative of only one type of history. But actually, there was a lot of other history that wasn't mentioned that we never learned, that changes that action or that place or that whatever into something that's much more nuanced. And instead, so it is a very interesting thing, and seeing even current events where we have had more and more evidence of the things that we thought we knew were true weren't really true.
Yeah.
You can go from wars to political scandals, like it just goes on and on. So I find it very interesting how people still like hold on to this idea of that the history I know is true, meanwhile also being faced every day with the history that I know is incomplete.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and people get defensive about that sort of thing. So if I go to speak to, because I speak to different groups all the time, I sort of go into the mouth of the lion, and a lot of times people will challenge me. They'll challenge me, and I actually get non-native people tell me, I know more about your history than you do. The history that I get has been passed on from generation to generation. So it is very different from what was written. But when we started doing our land claims, when we started to research more of this, and started to say to Canada, this is why you owe us money, which is a crazy process anyway. You have to prove that they owe you money. You have to prove that they took your land. That's the land claim process. So we, in order to get the compensation that we deserve, we went about the process anyway, and it was surprising for me because even in the Canadian government, people don't understand. People don't understand their own history, and these are elected officials. Even people that are within the bureaucracy don't understand. And we educate them as we're doing this process. We educate them. And even as we're educating them, they still continue to put up roadblocks, and they still continue to force us into having to litigate all of this so that it goes in the courts, which is not a bad thing because then it becomes public record. Everything that we're talking about becomes public record. Even what I've said today is public record within the courts. It's in the judicial transcripts. And I gave some of that testimony for the 1923 Waives Treaty on behalf of my community. So it's all there. And so if anybody needed to fully understand that, then they would go through those transcripts and come up with the history for this area that's been left out of our curriculum.
Well,
I don't know where I was going with that, but I hope that.
I don't. It was valuable nonetheless, and I think Adam will be putting some stuff in the show notes for resources where people can get at some of this information without having to put extra burden on Indigenous peoples to say, well, teach me my history. Well, a little bit you're going to have to do it because, as Adam and you had said earlier, the process of reconciliation, not only with the larger community, but part of it is your own self work of understanding. And I can appreciate that people are like, but if that's not true, then everything starts to crumble. And they look at that as like something that has to defend against. And it's kind of similar to, the seasons change certain plants pop up, and then when their season's done, they die, but then something else comes up that's, that's at the right time. So I
Mhm.
kind of think about it that way, is that you can't grow anything new when you're still holding on to these crops that are long done, right? Like you're holding on to an old structure that wasn't really working, and now you're going to have to reconcile that it wasn't really working, and it's not
Yeah.
really good for anybody, including indigenous people and non-natives.
Yeah.
And so that provides an opportunity just to really vision, like Adam was saying, and you were saying about, what do we want to be? What do I want my community to look like? What is the vision long term for Canada? And I think there's a benefit from asking those questions for yourself and for your larger community.
And that is providing safe space for those conversations. So a lot of times people won't speak up at um, town council meetings, for example. You won't have an person going in and making their point at these places because they're not safe for them. They can be attacked. So if everybody was at a more uh, level playing field, then these issues will be brought forward more readily because there's probably a safer space for people like me to be able to speak at these events. Because even with something as simple as my making a presentation to a Rotary Club, I don't get attacked by people who are PhDs in history telling me that my reasoning is flawed for this reason or that reason, and that my oral history means nothing because they have volumes and volumes of written history behind them that they've studied, and so it means nothing against what I'm saying. So that's what I mean by we need to have safe spaces so that these things are done. Uh, One of those safe spaces for me was that we are allowed to uh, go into the courts for the first time in 2017. Well, actually, 2012. Yeah, for when we were giving testimony on the 1923 Treaty. So there were people from each of our communities who went in and gave our oral history for the first time ever, and they provided a safe space. The courts were held in First Nation communities, and it was a safe space for us, and we felt that we could do it. And that's the kind of thing that needs to happen for more of this kind of thing. Um, so when you provide safe space, you provide the actual education that needs to happen. So that ties all together because um, in terms of September 30th, we still have educational institutions such as the Catholic School Board in Ontario that is not agreeing to fly the Every Child Matters flag. And that is an insult to all of the survivors of residential schools. That is an insult to the kids that never ever came back. Plus, it flies in the face of everything that even the Pope said when he visited Canada a few years ago, and he said that all of those things did happen, and that it should never have happened, and that we should do everything to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Denialism and finding ways to keep the flag off of your flagpoles is it goes against what the Pope wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just blown away by that.
Is there, since we're coming to the close of the hour and trying to respect your time, is there anything that a message that you didn't get to say today that you would like to say for September 30th?
Yeah, just remember that it's what I've been saying a lot lately. Just remember that we're human beings. We're people with feelings. My mother actually went through all of this, and she lived in pain most of her life with the conflict of having her culture taken away from her, and the conflict of participating in that culture again, and whether that was right to do or not. Something as simple as a smudge, she would, when I was growing up, tell us that we weren't supposed to be doing it because it goes against everything that she was taught in the residential school. Later, just before she passed away, my brother, who was an ordained minister with the United Church, brought smudging into his services, and she somehow found peace with that again. These are real people. These are real people with real hurts who were pretty much tortured throughout their life based on what they had to encounter while they were there. And people have to understand that. My mother was 4 years old when she was taken away to residential school. Look around your house. Would you want anybody to take your 4-year-old away? And she didn't see her family again for years. And people forget that part of it, that human part of it. And that's what really has to be understood. We're human beings. And when you deny that all of this ever took place, it hurts us again. And people just keep hurting us. And you just need to stop hurting us now. And we need to be made to feel that we're part of this experiment they call Canada. And as the other experiment south of us is teetering, I think it's really important that we start to think about those kinds of things over here. Miigwech.
I don't know if there is any better way to end the podcast, Adam. I know we normally do questions, but just wasn't sure.
I think the questions would be nice because some of them go to what people can do. So, what advice would you give a young person who wants to make a difference?
Well, learn your history, learn your true history, learn to question. Always question. And also learn the truth and quick reconciliation recommendations through and through.
That's something I need to do. I got the book years ago, and I have not put the work into it. But I'm not young anymore. But I'll pretend to be young, so I'll put the work into it.
Yeah. We're all young.
How do you think about failure, and how do you respond when it happens?
Sorry, question?
How do you think about failure, and how do you respond when it happens?
That's just a state of mind, and it's there really is no failure. We come into this world, and we try to live a good life in the best way that we know how, and
Oh, we lost
this connection.
Okay. Well, shoot. That was maybe we can hang on for a minute and hopefully we'll get reconnected. I'll say that we get a lot of great answers to that question, but they're all sort of roughly similar, and that's the most different and I'd say profound one that I've heard so far.
Mm-hmm. Incomplete as it was still profound.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll hold on for a little bit. I think just to wrap it up, we can decide how we use our time on this earth, whether we get multiple trips or just one, or wherever we go, doesn't really matter. But we have choices about how we live here. And I think personally, it's such a waste to live your life where you are trying to outcompete, outmaneuver other, destroy other people's ways of being or living, and not seizing the opportunity to really see how things could be better. And so I always find, talking to Jeff, there's this recommitment to just being open. You don't have to take everything to the thousandth percent, but just to be open to the idea of how things could be different, how your life could be different, how your own reconciliation could be the spark of something that's good for you and for your community.
There's a sense of humility, I think, is such a profound, like an important thing to have for growth and for realizing your potential in that regard. I think that gives me back to that Leonard Cohen song. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Um, the crack being the humility, that space that you provide for different perspectives, for new learnings, just for being open to what life might bring your way, instead of this kind of very egotistic approach so many of us seem to have. I certainly have it myself more often, well, too often, um, where I think I know the answers, uh,
Mm.
and most of the time I don't really.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
All right. Well, we'll call it a day. And yeah, thanks to
Yeah.
Jeff for being here.
Yeah. Jeff Monague, I think sort of just to, repeat what you said. Every time we get a chance to hear what he has to say, to listen to him, it's I think leaves me feeling both a sense of optimism. I think that there is a lot of good, a lot of potential that can be realized, and a sense of how much work remains too. So it's not the opposite to optimism. It's not pessimism, although there's a good dash of that on everything nowadays, it seems. Uh, but that there's a depth to the current, I think, that we're working with here, that we need to acknowledge.
I agree. All righty. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Yep. Thanks for listening, and have a great week. And we'll probably see you back here next week.
All right.